Hi, this is Jim McCarthy, and I'm speaking today with Greg Sandow, who is a man of many talents and accomplishments. He's a composer, he's a veteran classical music critic, he's a consultant to classical music organizations all over the world, and he also teaches at both Juilliard and the Eastman School of Music. I've probably missed a few things that you do. Greg, thank you for taking some time with us today. We always seem to have these really interesting conversations, and they always seem to be about the future.
Right. And, a difference between you and what goes on in my business, which is the classical music world, is that you want to adapt to the future, and they are not so sure. I mean, they know that things are changing, but they also want to do exactly what they've always done.
How do you manage to adapt to the future and do what you've always done?
Well, you can't.
This is a topic that you think about not just in your spare time or over a drink with me. This is something you think about on a professional level as well, the future specifically of classical music.
I do that, yes.
Can you talk about that? What have you done? What sort of projects have you done either in the past or now that go in that direction?
Well, typical of the things I've done with the past are tiny little steps that, let's say, a major symphony orchestra wants to take. Actually getting to know its audience. Can you believe that that is a surprise in the classical music world? Right. Find out what they think, what kind of people they are, how they'd like to be involved in the organization. I've done that. I've presented what are supposed to be really innovative kind of concert for a new kind of audience. I've done things like that.
Right.
More recently, I'm interested in something that I think is huge, and it's getting students, classical music students, doing concerts that will reach an audience their own age. Jim, you and I both know that the classical music audience is elderly on the whole. What's not so generally known is that wasn't always true. 50 years ago, median age around 35.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you say 50 years ago?
Yeah, 50 years ago.
So now the median age, for those who don't know, is more like what?
I would say 55 might be a good guess. The classical music world is very bad on stats and research, so I don't think there's a number. But I've heard, for example, that at the Metropolitan Opera, subscribers have been 65 median age.
Wow, which means that half their subscribers are older than 65.
Oh, yeah, and get this. New York's commercial classical music station, which just in a highly unusual move was bought by our public radio station, their listeners median age 72. So anyway, old.
So for every 2 years that pass, the classical music audience has aged 1 year. So the rate of replacement is very slow.
The rate of replacement is very slow. It's just inconceivable to anybody who knows what's going on that it's going to be replaced in the numbers that they see now.
Right.
So for a large orchestra that's performing, many, many weeks of the year, they're just not going to be able to have the audience to allow themselves to do that if they're willing to face reality. That's what they would see.
So what are some of your students who I presume are, median age probably more like 20 or 25, what are some of the things they're coming up with?
Well, I worked this summer with young orchestra musicians at a training program at the University of Maryland. That was one of the best experiences I've had. I primed the pump for them. The guy who ran the program wanted them to take charge of a concert completely on their own. So I instigated them, if you want. They started spewing ideas like 100 little volcanoes. Awesome. And finally, they gave a concert in which all the pieces were introduced either on video or in person in different ways. But they added stuff. They formed a little band. They did some rock arrangements in the midst of the classical pieces, including a quickly thrown together but brilliant Michael Jackson tribute, because he died the day of the concert. And this spoke for the world they lived in. Right. So I think it's the idea of combining what these kids share with everybody else their age and their classical music stuff that holds a lot of promise for the future.
Is part of the problem that the music that you traditionally hear from these organizations you talk about is almost by nature old? I mean, the music is old. Does that part of the problem?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. Now, nothing wrong with hearing old music. No. We look at paintings, we read old books, we love them. But they take their place in a context that includes the present. Obviously, new classical music is being not written, but doesn't play that major a part in the mainstream classical world. So, Jim, here's a comparison I often make. I hear all the time, oh, listen, it's okay that we're mostly playing Mozart and Brahms and Beethoven. Look at a museum. A museum displays old art. You and I know that museums have been tremendously innovative about doing shows that often include new stuff.
That's true.
And that's what brings people in. So, one day when I was contemplating this, I went to the website of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which has got to be the country's leading art museum, which everybody identifies with displaying, you know, the long-time classics of painting and sculpture, not to mention ancient Egyptian stuff and suits of armor. So what they were hyping on their website that day were 3 shows. One of them was, I believe, Raphael, you know, great painter of the past. Second one, Jeff Koons, contemporary artist whose work is so highly erotic that people say it's like soft porn. And number 3, a show at the Costume Collection that showed the influence of superhero costumes on fashion. Now, imagine if the New York Philharmonic were doing that. I think actually what they would do is they would blow the doors open, and people would come through those doors, and people of all ages would be interested in what they do.
Well, what I've seen, there was a show that's, I think, still touring, I think the music of Star Wars. I do know that was the kind of show that brought people in who might not otherwise show up.
It is interesting. There are 2 shows that have been going around, 2 kinds of shows. One is movie music, and particularly Lord of the Rings, actually. That's a big one. Because it's been packaged, and Howard Shore, who wrote the music, conducts it. And then video game music. And these shows bring in people who don't usually go to the orchestra.
Sure.
I think I would look at this as orchestras extending their product line, and not as something that's also going to bring those same people in to hear Mahler and Beethoven. I mean, a few, but I think it's terrific for orchestras to extend their product line, gives them deeper roots in the community, makes them seem current. People look upon them and smile. Hey, you know, I don't go to their regular concerts, but I was really thrilled when I went to hear Lord of the Rings. That's good for them.
The other thing, and here in Los Angeles, we hear a lot about Gustavo Dudamel.
Oh yeah.
I know everywhere you do, but here in Los Angeles, even if you're not tuned into the live music scene or the classical music scene, you still see the bus banners and the billboards and that kind of thing. Just for people who are not initiated into who Gustavo is and what he kind of represents, talk a little bit about Gustavo, and then tell me what you think about Gustavo.
If you're going to talk about talent, sheer, insane, raving talent, we're talking here about Elvis. You know, on a conducting. I think he's on that level, and one sign of it is when he began guest conducting orchestras in America, the musicians universally just flipped out and wanted him to be their music director, even though he's just a kid.
Right. That
is undeniable. A question might be, from a musical point of view, how he's going to grow up, because his when he conducts, there's this sheer animal appeal that you just cannot resist. But what's the staying power? What's the profundity? What does he do when he tackles music that he's never tackled before? This we're going to see. But, you know, you'd face that question with any young conductor. It's kind of rash to overestimate him at this point, terrific as he is. And then I think the big question for L.A. is, will he pull in a new kind of audience, and, God, particularly a Spanish-speaking audience, given how white and upscale classical music has been.
Right.
It is just beyond belief wonderful that the LA Phil should have a native Spanish-speaking conductor, given, you know, who lives in your city. So what will that mean in the long run? How are they going to play it? I know that one skeptic in the LA Times already said, listen, this is an upscale Latino appeal. Don't mistake this for mass Latino appeal. So we don't know at this point, but it really is better than most orchestras can do.
But I would say that it seems to me that in any case, it's a significant step, you know, in an interesting direction as compared to just sort of another of the same looking, the same acting, the same, you know, conductor that we might have hired.
Absolutely. I think the LA Phil had absolutely played this right. They found the perfect person for them, and somebody that really puts them in the public eye in a way that orchestras usually are not.